So this presentation is twofold. One, it's a bit of a background and update on the COP, that we Community of Practice for Conservation Standards Projects on Indigenous Land and Waters. And the other is an introduction to the project that Cyrus has just introduced, called Scaling Indigenous-led Conservation and Stewardship Using the Conservation Standards. And towards the end, we're going to have a bit of hopefully have a bit of a discussion, and we can get some more input from all of you, bright sparks. So yeah, thank you for joining. I'm based in Broome too, by the way, and working for conservation management as well. But I'm going to hand over to Frank now to kick off.
All right, thank you very much, Sam. And yeah, hello from me as well. And so Sam and I, we are together co-convening that community of practice, and that's why we're giving this presentation. For those of you who joined a little bit later, Sarah's already mentioned that earlier on this call, Indigenous people play a significant role in conservation, while they're only making up a very small proportion of the world's population, about 6%. 85% of the areas that are inhabited by Indigenous people are proposed for biodiversity conservation worldwide. And when you just solely look at the terrestrial conservation estate, as of today, worldwide, globally, about 40% of the conservation estate is contributed by Indigenous people and local communities. And that gives, I guess, a very good kind of a starting point on understanding why involving Indigenous people and having Indigenous-led conservation initiatives is so crucial in our shared goals of, I guess, protecting the environment of this planet. Indigenous people make a humongous contribution and need to be in the driver's seat of conservation. And that is a little bit the background, how this community of practice came about. It's probably a few years back already. It started off very small with including at CCNet rallies a session on working with Indigenous people, but over the years with the tools and the adaptations growing in popularity, that increased more and more. And a few years ago, we decided we needed to find some platform to bring Indigenous conservation standard practitioners and coaches together and help them. And that was a bit the point when we gave birth to the Community Practice Indigenous Conservation Standard projects. So the common thread is we all utilize the conservation standards or adaptations of them. We're not only referring these days to healthy country planning, because healthy country planning, I guess, is in particular an Australian brand or occurrence. And there's exciting work happening in other parts of the globe, in South America, in North America, where people coin their own adaptations of the conservation standards, but all with the same focus of supporting collaborations with Indigenous land and sea managers. So the COP is generally supporting the general and the bigger goals and the purpose of the Conservation Coaches Network, this global organization, and that is providing coaching support, improving the open standards and the adaptation continuously, sharing knowledge, sharing lessons learned, to ensure that everyone has the best tools available, and to expand the network. And I guess as part of that is the reasoning why the CCNet Australia franchise as well started this webinar series. In addition to those overarching goals of the CCNet, the Community of Practice has some additional goals, and that is to make sure that Indigenous people are in the driver's seat, advise, guide, and participate all those activities surrounding the conservation standards that are happening on Indigenous lands. Previously, before the COP came together, we always found that Indigenous people were one small voice in a big plenary, and we wanted to amplify this voice and make it, I guess, more prominent. We want to support improve practices working on Indigenous lands and waters, and learn from all the great developments in other parts of the world, and share this information, and provide a forum for Indigenous practitioners to learn, share, and potentially as well to provide training opportunities. With the ultimate goal, we want to see more Indigenous coaches and practitioners in this space. Thus far, before this project started, our efforts were, I guess, pretty basic, but that's all that we were able to get to make happen on the back of other work that we're doing. As part of CCNet Global, we have a homepage where we provide tools and resources, examples, articles, a discussion forum, and so forth. When you look in the chat, I've copied the link a few minutes ago in there. If you want to have a look up there, so that's where we normally post all our resources. And as part of that networking effort, we've developed as well a map that should become in future a bit of a yellow page directory that allows people to reach out to other communities doing adaptations of the conservation standards and directly contact them. I guess we're all very much spread out, as much as we're spread out here within Australia. Same thing when you look globally applies, because a lot of the lands of Indigenous people are very remote. So we want to create this space of networking. So in a quick nutshell, that's kind of what we do as part of the COP. We always welcome people joining in. So if you want to get in touch with us on the homepage, you find all the details. We run an email listserv, and if you want to subscribe to that or be included in any communications, just drop us a line there. And with this brief background on the COP, I'll hand over to Sam to talk about the project, the second part of this webinar.
Thank you. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, so as Frank mentioned previously, Frank and Stuart and others were doing working on the COP on top of all the other work they've had to do. So there wasn't much room to really advance it. But fortunately, earlier this year, we were lucky enough to be involved in a wider project that looks at the scaling up of conservation. And we were, together with a few other heads, we developed this project around scaling Indigenous-led conservation using the conservation standards. And so our project is part of a bigger project that's funded through the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation through Foundations of Success. And it's there's 5 other projects in this wider project. And as you can see there, they're crossing lots of different genres. So not all about Indigenous-led conservation, but sustainable fishing in Indonesia, reducing of illegal killing of birds in Mediterranean, protected area management in Latin America. So some really interesting areas, but we're all part of this learning network where we're trying to look at how can we scale up conservation efforts. As part of this network, we meet every month and we exchange information and we're working through some areas around behavioral change and networking and some other really interesting areas to do with scaling. So one of the cool things about this project is we're looking at what is Indigenous-led conservation. And I know a lot of you on the call here have done work overseas, and some of you may have not, but it's very different in each of the different countries that we're sort of working with. And so we know in Australia there's a big movement in Indigenous ranges and Indigenous protected areas, but in other areas of the world, it's around community forestry, it's locally managed marine areas, Indigenous and community conservation areas. In Canada, there's a big Guardian Watchman program, and jointly managed parks between different levels of government and Indigenous groups are also big and varied throughout the world. So what is Indigenous-led conservation is different in different areas. So in terms of the project goals, we have a few of them. And the first one is about how can we explore pathways to scaling Indigenous-led conservation using the conservation standards. And the conservation standards is our primary aim here, but we're also very aware that in lots of countries, there's lots of other great Indigenous-led conservation initiatives and lots of learnings from those initiatives. So we are casting the net wider to take up those learnings and to work with some of our colleagues in places like Latin America and Asia, where conservation standards are with Indigenous groups is just sort of growing now. We're looking at what are the enablers and barriers to that scaling. So what makes it work and what hinders it? And again, that's very different in different countries. And what we realise, or a lot of us know, in Australia, we're very lucky to have the IPA programs and the Indigenous Ranger programs. But for some people in many other countries, that's a dream that may or may not ever happen. Identifying mechanisms to assist with the scaling of Indigenous-led conservation. We're going to talk a bit more about this later, but what are some of the things that can be put in place to help with this around resources, around training, around sort of support backbone organisations? And then it's about sharing our learnings with the broader community. So through this network, through the COP, and also through the learning network they're a part of. And then one of the things that I guess really pushed us to take up this project was that this was the first opportunity where the COP has had some funding and some resources to grow and develop it, and we're really seeing that now, and we'll take you through that. So I guess to introduce the idea of scaling, and some of you have seen a sort of similar diagram before, there's a lot of organisations wanting to grow conservation to scale. For example, this one, we're going to scale up restoration of natural ecosystems to sequester 1 gigaton of carbon over the next decade. And people start these projects and then they kind of wait or expect some magic to happen, or they're so busy doing other things that they think it's just going to magically occur, and then outcomes at scale occur. And we all know that doesn't happen. And so through the Foundations of Success, Nick and others, they've done a lot of research. They've done a big desktop research around what are some of the scaling models that have worked in the past, and they've typically come up with about 5. They've come up with about 5 generic scaling pathways, and Frank will talk a bit more about them later. And they're not the only ones, and they're certainly not in their current state what we will be using, but we're working with them to sort of refine them and tweak them, and we'll talk a bit more about that. I guess there's a lot of really big initiatives at the moment that are kind of the impetus for some of this scaling. The 30 by 30, closing the gap. A lot of the initiatives within Australia and globally are asking us to go to scale. So it's quite relevant to what we're trying to do now. Thanks, Frank. So yeah, I love showing this picture because this is, we were very conscious that Frank and I are non-Indigenous. And so before we sort of set about on our path, we wanted to assemble a group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous leaders from around the world to help us to manage and drive the project. And so as you can see there, we've got lots of faces. We've got representation from Indonesia, East Timor, Cameroon, Latin America, Australia as well. We've got Chrissy Warren and Daniel Odes there. And yeah, and we've got Leon Andrews, a wonderful elder from North America, and Dr. Deb Simmons. So a really great group of people. And this group is the project steering committee, but also we have regional facilitators who are helping with our case study work in the 3 regions that I'll talk about soon. And again, not all of these people are Indigenous, but they work very closely with Indigenous communities and Indigenous people. And so we're growing that sort of, in terms of growing the COP and growing the program, we're hoping that these people may continue after this project ends in this work. So our project is a global project, and we have 3 main areas that we want to focus on, because we know there's been scaling of Indigenous-led conservation using the conservation standards or an adaptation of. So Australia, of course, with the story of healthy country planning, but we know that South America has started to do some fantastic and really interesting adaptations there for working with Indigenous people, and also North America. This is where our case studies will be. We have the 3 case studies in these 3 regions to really try and get down to what the enablers and what the limiting factors are for scaling. But we didn't want to forget the rest of the world, or Africa and Asia in particular, because we know there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of really strong networks and a lot of other really interesting Indigenous-led conservation initiatives. So the plan is that we're going to do our regional case study work with North America, South America, and Australia, but then also test our theories, test our scaling models, and our ideas with the control block, which is what we call the control blocks of Africa and Asia. And so we've got some great representation there on our project steering committee that we can tap into, and also the existing CCNet networks that exist there as well. So just to give you an idea of where we've been and where we're going, the project started roughly in March with a bit of a initial project design. We had some good heads in the room there with Stuart and Cal and Amanda Sheedy and others. We started the participation in the learning network with the other projects around the world. We established the project steering committee, and look, that did take a long time, and we were pretty slow off the mark, but we felt that was really important. And now, as you can see, we've got that committee, and it's really great to have that. We have monthly project steering committee meetings, and so it's quite nice to be on a Zoom in the middle of the day, because we've been up late and up early to reach. We only have one, so there's people tuning on at 11 o'clock at night and others at 6 o'clock in the morning, but everyone's enthusiastic. And we developed the methodology for the project initially. So we're here, July, August. We've got the project steering committee together. We've had 4 meetings so far. We've appointed regional facilitators to do the case study in North America, Latin America, and Australia. So in Latin America, we have a great combination of Valentina, who's in Colombia, and Gustavo, who's in Brazil. A lot of you would know Gustavo, and hopefully some of you will meet Valentina at the rally in September. In North America, we have Amanda Sheedy assisting us there. And in Australia, we've got Frank and I have taken on that role. We didn't get anyone in the end to help us with that, but we've got a great network of people, you guys, that can help us with our research once we get that underway. And I'll talk a bit more about that. Now, the next stop point is on that, and that's around, we've developed some interview questions and online surveys. So part of this case study work is about reaching out to stakeholders and projects around getting some insight into the scaling of Indigenous-led conservation in Australia, healthy country planning. So that's going to take the form of a SurveyMonkey questionnaire that'll go out, and we are going to make that the same for all the 3 regions, although it'll be tweaked to make it relevant to the context of each country, so we can compare the answers to some of those questions. And then from there, that's a bit of a quick grab of conservation information. From there, we're going to have interviews with the key players of the scaling effort, and so that'll be interviews or small group work interviews via Zoom that we're going to do as well. So that's going to happen in the next couple of months, or starting this month, hopefully. We're doing a series of webinars. We've got today. Next week, Frank and I are leading 2 webinars throughout the community of practice. So same webinar, but different time slots to capture the different people from around the world. And again, we're going to continue with our monthly PSC meetings. Going forward, we're going to, as the information, our research starts to bring in data and information, which it's time to start synthesizing that. So we're going to have quite a few sessions at the rally in Canada, where we're going to look at scaling, and also we're having a side event just before the rally starts on the Monday to look at collective impact, the role of collective impact in efforts to scale Indigenous-led conservation. And so the purpose of that workshop is to bring in some of the great thinkers and organisations who are going to be there into a room and go through a process of identifying what that support could look like. And now, yeah, so further analysis of the surveys and interviews, and then at the end, we're going to have a workshop, a virtual workshop to bring it all together, first by the regions, and then all together globally. So quite a lot of work to do in the next 6 months. And then right at the end there, again, some further analyses and reporting to do around the surveys and interviews, consolidating all our work, developing the scaling models. So at the end of this, we want to have some scaling models to sort of show how we think we can grow Indigenous-led conservation. And of course, there's going to be different ones for different regions based on the enablers and limiting factors, but there may be some overarching ones as well. And then we'll develop a final report and a pitch deck to sort of go through how we think this could be implemented. And definitely no confirmation yet, but there is potential of a phase 2 where these projects of the learning network may have some resources to implement these scaling models, which is fairly exciting. Thanks, Frank. Feel free to jump in if I've missed anything.
No, that's terrific. Thanks, Sam. And I guess as Sam beforehand mentioned, Foundations of Success in the lead up to this project did a big desktop research and to collate all the different approaches that been documented across the world, how scaling happens. I just want to spend on this slide, give you a very quick overview, and then have a look how that applies to our experience in Australia with one of those adaptations and healthy country planning. So everything starts, I guess, at square one. You have an initial project, initial strategy happening somewhere. That could be a specific conservation strategy, like changing the way how we're doing something, or it could be a place-based solution, like using a protected area and developing a conservation standard plan. One way how you can achieve scaling is just by expanding the initial project scope. So let's say, bring it to an Australian example, from looking at one small protected area, you may decide you want to actually increase the boundaries and include intertidal and marine areas to a terrestrial area. So pretty much you're expanding just the initial scope as the first scaling approach. And then a different approach could be to replicate projects in multiple within a program, meaning you want to recruit more people adopting the same practice and implementing it at multiple locations. Aside from replication, one way of looking at scaling is as well scaling through diffusion. That is, you provide all the information, you write up everything from a successful method or strategy, make it available for people, and assume and hope that people pick that up, adopt it to their circumstances, and apply it in an innovative way in their areas. That being the third approach. Changing system conditions has been a big one for us in Australia. That has a lot to do with providing the funding and background, for example, or other kind of a more policy-driven things that are happening in the background to make the scaling of a strategy really successful. And then there is the wild card. We call it the wild card because it is probably the least documented and the least research scaling approach, and that is about transforming system intent and introducing new ways of thinking. In our concept of Indigenous-led conservation, one thing that happened over, I guess, decades here in Australia, but that you can see happen elsewhere in the world, is the way how these days Indigenous knowledge is much more appreciated and on equal grounds to Western scientific knowledge when it comes down to the conservation of nature. And this was something that grew at the beginning. I guess scientists often look down upon the vast knowledge Indigenous communities had, but over the years, that whole dialogue changed. And now we kind of talk more about a two-toolbox approach and see both sources of knowledge and information on a similar platform. So those are, I guess, the 5 really generalized ways how you can look at scaling. And now I want to take you quickly onto a journey to how that reflects to Australia. Part of the reason why we're doing this project is, as Sam said earlier, we want to use Australia as a bit of a case to look back, because scaling happened in Australia, and then see how that relates to North America, South America, and Africa and Asia as a way of looking forward. So there's those 2 perspectives in this project. The story of conservation standards with Indigenous groups in Australia, or in our case, Healthy Country Planning, started in 2010 in a community in the very northwest of Australia, the Woonamagambra traditional owners, with the development of the Ungu Healthy Country Plan. That was a joint project of the Woonamagambra traditional owners, the Kimberley Land Council, and supported by Bush Heritage Australia. And in this project, really, the method was the kickoff point for the methodology Healthy Country Planning to be developed based on the conservation standards or conservation action planning. Modifications were made to better fit into this context, working with traditional owners in the Northwest. And from there, you could kind of, to keep the language for this scaling project, we look at one Healthy Country Plan as a project, and for the sake of Australia, Oceania, we look at each, for example, at the nation as a program where multiple projects can sit in. Over the years, more Healthy Country Plans happened, and the first scaling approach kind of occurred for us in the Kimberley. The Kimberley Land Council, once it worked really well in the context of Woonamagambra traditional owners, the Land Council, who's looking after the northwest of Australia, decided that Healthy Country Planning should be the main tool to develop adaptive management plans for all the different ranger programs. So the Land Council expanded the project area and used the conservation standards in multiple locations there. From a traditional owner perspective, it was replication. They used the learning from the neighboring traditional owner group and applied it in their context. And while that happened in the Kimberley, on a national level, there was as well a development of higher level strategies. There was lobbying that occurred with CSIRO, who was developing the IPA Plan of Management guidelines for Australia and recommending Healthy Country Planning as a best practice tool to help communities come up with a plan of management. It was the likes of Michael Looker and many others in many organizations finding the funding to support the scaling effort, insofar that the Nature Conservancy was able to raise funds to provide training events across the north, where we use again this approach of replication, where people learn the methodology and then applied it in different parts of the country, and equally lobbying government to continue funding for the IPA program that is still going strong after so many years. So you can see there's in Australia over the years a lot of different scaling approaches applied. There was a lot of resources thrown into it, but all leading to an incredible outcome that has seen Healthy Country Plans now covering a really large part of the country and of the conservation estate in Australia. And so part of our research and part of our outreach now in Australia is scheduling interviews with all those people that were heavily involved in those scaling efforts, from the side of NGOs, government agencies, and community organizations like land councils, who were strong supporters of this approach. So just quickly,
Frank,
sorry,
yeah. I was just going to say 5 minutes left, so we've got some time for questions. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, so there's different scaling approaches. As I said, there is scaling of the initial project scope. replicating projects, developing higher level strategies, and then to look globally, and that is kind of the element of looking forward, is about looking towards other areas where healthy country planning or other adaptations occurred. And that is more the approach of diffusion, where we take the learnings from Australia, put it into a new context in other regions, and let them run with it and see how they develop tools that are applicable and worthwhile for them in their local context. And there's great work happening in Chile, in Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Canada, in parts of Asia. And we want to see that grow through diffusion and innovation. So I guess with that, I'll hand over to Sam to make most out of the remaining time.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, so I guess just to recap again, that so some of the questions that we wanted to answer through this project was, what are the inhibitors and enablers for Indigenous-led conservation and stewardship using the conservation standards, and what is happening elsewhere? And then what's the support structures and resources needed to increase the uptake of the conservation standards with our Indigenous communities? And we know that's going to look different in different regions, and part of this project is diving deep into that. And we're at the point now where we're going to start that diving, so it's pretty exciting. Thanks, Frank. We did want to. Oh, you go, Frank.
Sorry, I was just muted. So as we said earlier, we're looking as well as collective impact as one of those aspects to help us with those scaling models, because I guess collective impact is an approach that is highly applicable to us here in your context of the CCNet Australia, CCNet globally, and for us more so even for the COP Indigenous CS projects, because I guess it is about multiple stakeholders working in the same place, trying to achieve a common goal, and yeah, I guess improving conservation and collective impact is a very helpful tool in circumstances like that. And the different franchises and CCNet Global playing in many ways the role of one of those backbone organizations, like to provide this coordinating function of different players doing different things. The activities a backbone organization are doing are changing over the maturity of, I guess, collaboration. They may not all of them apply at the same time. Some of them apply rather at the beginning, like supporting aligned activities and guiding the development of a common vision and a common set of strategies. While once collaboration matures, a backbone organization then shifts with some of their support roles insofar that they maybe focus more on establishing shared measurement practices and build the public will. For us specifically in this Indigenous context, I guess the last two roles are probably the key roles: advancing policy, as Sam mentioned, and not in all parts of the world the policy context, yes, has been established for Indigenous people to step up and be able to be represented in conservation planning as they should be. And funding across the board has often been mentioned as one of the core shortfalls for us, not having enough funding for training, not having enough funding to implement management plans and build capacity in a group. So this is as well a core aspect of what we see a backbone organization do. And with that, I'll hand over to Sam and for the last slide.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, so Cyrus, we did have a bit of a group discussion question time planned around this question in the context of collective impact. What do you, all of you there now on the call, what do you identify as the critical roles and functions that can make this scaling happen in the Oceania area, a success like healthy country planning? So that was a question we wanted to ask you all, and then we were going to open up a whiteboard, a Zoom whiteboard that I've never done before, but Frank and I had a practice and it worked pretty well. But Cyrus, I'll leave it to you how you want to run this in the last remaining minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. Emma was actually going to manage this bit. Maybe if you want to copy that question and put it into the chat.
Yes.
So that people can see that now.
Right.
Emma, oh, you're on mute.
And don't you want to
Thanks.
maybe put it into the whiteboard, Sam? That might be simpler.
Yeah, that might be easier, yeah.
Okay. Is the whiteboard coming up?
I think Sam certainly knows the questions better than I do, so because I can't see it.
So I can see the whiteboard. So we just on your, because you're.
Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah. So, well, no. So I think that's so I can see it. Is there anyone who can't see the whiteboard?
I can see the board, but I can't see the board.
I can't get the text on there. That's okay. We can just put it in the chat, Frank, and maybe you can have a play around with getting it on there while we start the Q&A.
Well, I can see your whiteboard and the text is on there, Sam.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, I can't see it myself. That's a bit weird. But yeah, so well, let's start there. Look, we really wanted to open it up to all of you around what you've heard and how this project and the COP may support you and your work in around scaling Indigenous-led conservation using the conservation standards. So we really just wanted to open it up for some feedback and some ideas. If I don't get people, I'm going to start picking on people.
I think a workshop-based approach is pretty important, and just having the same, familiar faces coming and sharing examples of other projects, but also, I think what you've already said about people, Indigenous people learning from their neighbours, but through a common, there's a common planning framework, and there's the common people that are teaching it and showing those examples and connecting the dots, basically.
Great, thanks, Paul. And people, you feel free to add a post-it note on here.
I'm not sure about others. Mine's still loading. It's been loading for a long time, so I don't have the ability to add anything just yet. So.
That's right. Feel free to tell us, though, Natalie, if you've got any good ideas.
Sam, I think, and Frank, I think there are a number of studies that have been done by organisations that might be helpful here, that have done case studies on various different aspects that relate to scaling. They're not, they don't relate exactly to conservation standards, but I think they're probably helpful for you to look at. So there are a couple of those that are useful on sustainable financing, enterprise development and so forth, that have done quite good case studies around the world.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. Would you mind maybe sending us some specific links to those that you have in mind, or a copy of them?
Yeah, I can. I can send you. I can send you a couple of those that that you can take a look at. But they're good, and they include Australia in those. A couple of good examples of community-led programs that relate to scaling but looking and focused on things like sustainable financing, which is a very key issue in scaling.
What about our New Zealand colleagues? I remember one of you mentioned at the start, this is something you're trying to do over in New Zealand. Who was that? I forget your name.
That's me. I'm just thinking about my, hello, did I mute? Kia ora tātou. Yeah, so this is one of these things where we have a lot of small scale projects, either led or involving our Indigenous communities. And I guess this is that next step of working out, well, how do we connect our communities, given that, you know, we're working off we've got common goals and outcomes often. And so often our biggest challenges in the capacity of our representatives who are busy with everything else, let alone the funding aspect. So, but the nice thing is when we have strong frameworks like the collective impact framework and then the work that you guys are doing, I can definitely see that clear alignment just to make sure that we stay focused.
Great. Has been some talk of training in New Zealand. Has that happened yet?
It's underway. I know we've got Hal Jin from Nature Conservancy online as well.
Great. Oh, that's exciting.
Thanks,
It's coming.
Hi, yes, yes, Sam. It's underway. We're sort of building the foundations and reaching out to people about this wonderful opportunity to better plan for conservation success. Yeah, unfortunately, as Elva pointed out, there has been a couple of priorities for conservation groups in the last sort of 1 year or so. COVID didn't really help. So yeah, we are certainly sort of thinking of ramping up the program in the next few months or so, and Pip and Stuart joining us in that journey as well.
Right. Got the big guns there.
We're very lucky.
Well, we're really lucky because Elva and a couple of her colleagues will be great coaches. We're looking forward to it. It'll be fun.
Yeah. We've got quite a few little post-it notes going down. That's great. Anybody else? Did anything else strike a chord with anyone in terms of like going forward, like what kind of support or structures could be used to help with this scaling effort that we're trying to reach?
I guess it's the thing around, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Clear. It's the output of the process and then being able to demonstrate its implementation as well through, I mean, I guess it's that sharing news stories about the success of a particular strategy within a healthy country plan, for example, but really showing the actual outputs of the process and then how they're being used and bringing certain teams together to be able to implement those things and actually seeing those changes happening from the plans to day-to-day activities.
Yeah, I think Claire, that's a really good one, and that's part of that common collective impact, that shared measurement tools, and you see organisations do that really well, like MSF, for example. But they're not digging deeper than just whether strategies are implemented. But as we all know about Mary, like actually seeing how groups are using their healthy country plans or how their Indigenous protected areas are actually going in terms of achieving what they want to achieve, those kind of measurements, I think, can be very powerful.
Yeah, and providing the resources and tools. And we know that there's a lot of resources and tools out there, but sometimes there can be too many. And it's being able to know where to go. And I mean, I guess it's part of this community of practice is to be able to support people to know where to go to find that information and not be overwhelmed with all the incredible great work that's happening out there. But being able to know where you can go to access some of that information and not be overwhelmed by it.
Right. Thanks, Claire. How are we going, Emma? We got a few more minutes for questions, or we need to wrap up?
Yeah, I think, yeah, time to wrap up. So it looks like you've got quite a lot of feedback there, and I guess, can people still provide you with some more ideas and answers to your question, like through what's the best way to contact both of you?
Well, certainly we have a email. We have our own email account now, the COP, so we'll put that in the chat.
Great.
And then also, I guess, just stay tuned for the online questionnaire, and we'll be reaching out to many of you for the interviews around this project. So, if you can contribute that way, thanks, Frank. That would be great. And if you just want to reach out generally, yeah, just reach out, grab our numbers, or email the COP, and we'd love to chat with you all and make some connections where we haven't already got them.